So, Jamie Fiore Higgins.
Yes.
Okay. You're a contributing author to A Different Story, which just happens to be the title of one of your pieces. So we might come back to that as well.
Okay.
So what I know about you, because we've known each other a little while, but we've just been talking and saying that we don't really know each other that well, do we? Having never met.
Yep.
We don't know how tall we are.
That's right.
But I do know that you used to be a Wall Street trader, and
Yep.
now a stay-at-home mum with 4 children.
Yes. There they are.
Yes. And you are a writer.
I am.
Your job.
That's my job now.
Yeah, lovely. So is there anything else that you want to say about who you are before I ask you any questions?
No, I'm just really happy to be here and really happy that I got to be a part of your press and this amazing book of personal essays. So no, I think that's good.
Yeah, lovely. So we will talk about the book in a minute and your involvement in it, but I'd like to kind of go back a bit further than that, and just ask you about how you actually got started writing. Is it something you've always done?
Well, it's funny because I wrote a lot as a kid. I remember writing oodles and oodles of poems as a middle schooler. And my brother reminded me when I got back into writing that I had a short story published when I was in the 6th grade.
Really?
So I always loved writing. I wrote for the school newspaper. I loved my English class in high school. And I actually thought I'd be an English major. But my first creative writing class in college, I didn't really gel with the professor. And I felt a little exposed. So I ended up majoring in math because I always felt 2 + 2 always equals 4, whether you gel with a professor or not. And so that's really where my path kind of broke apart. And then I ended up working for 20 years and had a career that was pretty busy that didn't really allow me a lot of free time, especially as I had kids. And when I left about 5 years ago, I started journaling about my experiences. And my girlfriend, my childhood girlfriend, who known me since we were 7, said, you know, Jamie, you really need to start writing again. And it was really good advice because when I left my career, I threw myself into what being a stay-at-home mom is supposed to be. And I volunteered a ton and I was the PTO president. And it didn't really polish my diamond, if you know what I'm saying. Like, it kept me busy and I was engaged and I wasn't bored. And it made my life a little bigger than just diapers and car line pickups. But it really didn't, I feel like, bring out my best when I say polish my diamond. It really didn't make me shine. Yeah. And so when my girlfriend told me to do that, she actually was studying with Jack Rapes in LA and forwarded me when Jules launched her online program. And it was like being with an old friend again. So I was hooked. So that's been for a little over 2 years now. So I guess the short answer is, I think I always was a writer, but it's amazing what we tell ourselves, I think, especially as we age. Mm-hmm. And I think for a long time, I kind of ignored that about myself and reconnected midlife. Yeah. I guess I'm midlife now. I don't feel midlife, but I am midlife.
That's really gorgeous. And I love the story that you shared when we did the book launch about how you hired yourself as a writer, and about, was it your son who said you were a writer in one of his projects? And that was a really proud moment, I guess.
Yeah, because I think that, at least where I come from, which is the New York City metropolitan area, so much of our identity comes from how you make money. Mm. And I feel like our society tells us that that's how we're identified. And P.S., the more money, the better.
Mm-hmm.
So when I decided I was going to write, I really struggled with the identification of being a writer because I wasn't making money from it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a job. I wasn't getting paid for it. So what does that even mean? And I decided I was going to write a book. And so I said to myself, okay, well, what if, Jamie, you hire yourself to do it? And so what if you don't get paid for it? But if you make this personal commitment for yourself and you give yourself a job, then you're going to work at it, as opposed to me just saying, I want to write a book. I literally wrote down a contract for myself and I said, I'm hiring myself. And so what if I'm not paid for it? But that really shifted for me the responsibility I had to completing this task. And then what I found was it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, for my kids who, when I left work, my son was pretty young. He was only 4, about 5, maybe a little, maybe he was 5. Yeah, he was 5. And so that was really hard for me because I really wanted, not that being a stay-at-home mom is not valuable, it is, it's a very important job, but I really wanted them to see me fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to say, as important as the job I have is, it wasn't fulfilling me. And it was really important to me for my children to feel that I had something of my own, whether I made $1 or $1 million, where I was fulfilled. And so it was really cute because when my son was in 1st grade, I had been home for a couple years. On Mother's Day, when he had to write a little bio about me, he said under my occupation was a writer. And that was really sweet because that's how they really see me now.
Yeah.
And I think they see me as more of a freelance writer because it's not like I do it 40 hours a week and I do it in drips and drabs. But it's been really good because they do see me as something beyond someone who washes and cooks and cleans and makes sure they do homework, etc.
Yeah.
And most important, I think they see me as having something that fulfills me as a person. Beyond, especially for women, that it's fulfilling beyond giving life and sustaining life.
I love that. So you said about you might only even be writing in dribs and drabs. So how do you write? I mean, 4 kids is a lot. 4 kids is a busy life.
It's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you do it? Because there's loads of people out there who'll say, I want to write, but I'm just too busy.
So when I decided to write this book, I was committed for about a week and then I gave up on it because I said, I'll never be able to find the time to do it. And I had gone out to breakfast with my mom and I told her, and my mom said, Jamie, no one is going to give you time. No one's going to say, here, go do this. You have to steal it. And it's interesting, the word steal, because people have commented to me that the concept of stealing is a little bit of, that it doesn't belong to you, that you have to take it. So maybe steal is not the best word.
Yeah, yeah.
So to me, I think it's more of a create time.
Yeah.
So I found ways to create time. So for example, when I'm sitting in car lot, so what I do is I use the stopwatch on my computer. So I start with making a weekly commitment, whether it's 5 hours or 10 hours. I think my highest commitment has been 15 hours because I decided that a part-time job is probably around 15 hours a week. So it ranges anywhere from 5 to 15 hours, and I make the commitment for the week. And then I have a stopwatch on my computer, always going, and I'll do it in 1 or 2 or 3 hour increments. And then I'll bring my laptop everywhere. So if I'm in car line for 20 minutes, I'll work on it for 20 minutes. Or sometimes I'm able to just find a whole hour to do it, or I'll get up early and do an hour. The weekends are a little easier, and so I might do a couple hours in a row there. But for me, it's more seeing the opportunities of how small bits of time add up. So I have never sat down and written for more than 2 hours, I don't think, in my life. And I wrote a first draft of a book in anywhere from 30 to 2-hour increments.
Mhm.
And they just add up over time.
Yeah. Okay.
And I
Yeah,
think
can
the
see that.
only key to that is being very focused, that when the time starts, you're on.
Mhm.
There can't be any dilly-dallying, because I think a lot of people say, oh, well, you can't write a book unless you could just sit for hours. It's not true. You just really have to be able to turn it on and turn it off. And
Yeah.
for me, it was the only possibility, because there would have never been an opportunity. I read On Writing by Stephen King,
Mhm.
and he talks about how, I'm throwing out numbers here, but he'll put himself in the office and he doesn't come up for 6 hours.
Yeah.
That's not a possibility for me. I
No.
don't think it's going to be a possibility for me anytime soon, especially because with COVID, my kids, when they go to school, are only gone for a couple hours at a clip.
Mm.
So I think for me, it's, instead of bird by bird, it's word by word.
Brilliant.
You just have to do it in small little increments.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Now you're talking about a book which is not the book that has been published. So
Correct.
I do want to come back to the other book, the bigger book.
Mhm.
But before we do that, I just would like you to tell me about your involvement in A Different Story, how that was for you.
So being in A Different Story was very transformative for me for a few reasons. And I think there are reasons that any writer deals with. And so for me, I feel like A Different Story, I was able to cross a bunch of personal hurdles.
Mhm.
So the first one is, who cares about my story? Why would anyone care? And all the kind of lies we tell ourselves. And then number two, it's once you decide that, okay, my story does matter, I want people to see it, that it's the panic of, oh my gosh, what are they going to think about me?
Mhm.
And so I feel like A Different Story really helped me. Well, the whole writing process and doing the method writing started the process of me, I always say, pulling off my muzzle.
Mhm.
Because for me, in my life, and I'm sure a lot of people feel this way, I spent my lifetime muzzling myself, not saying what I really thought, to either please my parents or to please my friends or to please my boss, and looking the other way with injustice and all that stuff. And so what writing and method writing really taught me was to be generous with what I put forth in terms of my product.
Mhm.
So that only got me so far, though, because when the product is sitting in a little notebook on my bookshelf, it's been transformative for me because I've let it come out of me onto the page, and I've said things. I've written it down and shared it with a dozen people in a class, but then putting it on a published page really takes it to a whole new level.
Mhm.
And for me, what I found is, during my writing journey with method writing, with The Different Story, and again, we always talk about this with writers, with Robert Frost, no tears for the writer, no tears for the reader. What I found is, the more generous I am with my personal struggles, instead of being condemned, rather it's, oh my gosh, me too. Oh
Mm.
my gosh, thank you for saying this. It's funny, a friend of mine who bought A Different Story, when was it? A couple months ago, just texted me this morning and said, oh my gosh, Fords with Desperation, I feel like you were talking to me.
Oh.
And here she is, she's a contemporary of mine, but she doesn't have any children and
Mhm.
she's not married. So
Mhm.
here she was, she saw something in that resonated with her.
Yeah.
And you're only going to do that if you're really honest you're honest.
Mhm.
So I think the method writing got me to the point where I had confidence to put on the page. I
Mhm.
think a different story gave me the confidence of putting it out there to the world and not being ashamed of it.
Mhm.
I think it came at a really important time in my life. I just turned 45. And if I'm lucky, I'm halfway through. I might not be that lucky. And for me, it's like, why not? Whose permission am I trying to get? Whose acceptance am I trying to get
Mhm.
by not putting my truth out into the world? I'm not afraid anymore. I'm more excited about the people that I connect with through my writing than I am about the fear of judgment that people might have about what I write about, if that makes sense. And I feel like finally at this point in my life, that balance has tipped. Whereas I felt all my life, it's like, oh, I'm afraid what people are going to think. I don't want them to know that I struggle as a mother. I had 4 kids. I don't want them to know that sometimes I wish I had none.
Mm.
And now I'm like, you know what? I'd rather be honest. And if one person says, oh my gosh, me too, that's worth the other people rolling their eyes. Because guess what? They're lying to themselves probably anyway.
Yeah. Wow. So the title of the book is also the title of one of your pieces in the book, isn't it?
Yes.
How was that for you? Because I know you weren't the person who said, let's call the book A Different Story. So I'm really interested in how that felt to you when the whole group, all of us, said, you know what, that's the title for the book.
I think for me, and I can't get into the head of why everyone else wanted that title, but for me, it was so meaningful because in the essay, it was sometimes I wished I lived a different life, a different story.
Yeah.
So to me, that little nugget really encapsulated what method writing and what this book has done for me. The permission with myself to write those words and then publish those words that sometimes we wake up and wish we lived a different story.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's hard to admit to sometimes because you don't want people to think that you don't appreciate the story you're living. I do. But everyone lives with regret and wonder and what if and could have been. So to me, the fact that that was the title helped gave it extra meaning for me.
Mm. Lovely. So you've also been talking about this other book that you've been writing, and I know you've finished the first draft of it, haven't you? So what
Yes.
are you happy to share with us about that book?
So basically, I started writing right after I stopped working. I spent close to 20 years at Goldman Sachs. I worked there from when I was 22 through when I left. It was my first job after college. And a lot of crazy things happened. And I realized that it was a very dysfunctional environment. And I was so enmeshed in this culture of money and power and excess that I knew how messed up things were on some level, but I didn't. And it wasn't until I left. And I say this, and I don't want to be insensitive by this term, so hopefully I won't offend people, but I felt like I had a little PTSD after I left.
Right. Yes.
And I would think about stuff that happened. I would say to my husband, did that really happen? Like, that's so messed up. And then I would mention it to people. Like, we would, I'd be at the PTA on garden day planting tulips at the preschool. And, a mom would say, oh, what did you do? And I would make comments and like little stories would come up and they'd be like, what? That really happened? are you kidding me? And so then I started just journaling about it, and then I committed to writing it. And the funny thing about it is, and we've talked about this, Rhea, people would ask me, what are you writing? I said, oh, I'm writing a novel about being a working woman on Wall Street. And I think I said it was a novel and not a memoir because I think I was scared to put myself out there, that this is now 4 years ago when I started writing it. And I remember my mom at first said, oh, you're gonna put that out there? Like, what are people gonna say when they read all this stuff? And I said, well, it's gonna be a novel. So, it's a novel. So, it might not all be true. And so, but it was really mostly true. And then I finished it. And I was talking around to different people in the industry, and they said, oh, well, if it's going to be a novel, then, you don't have to have 4 kids. You can only have 2 kids. And I said, well, but I was the only managing director at Goldman Sachs, female managing director at Goldman Sachs, who ever had 4 kids. Like, that's actually important.
Yeah.
And then I realized how important it is that it's a memoir, because it was true. And so, but this all was part of the process, because it was all during this process where I was trying to come to grips with putting myself on the page, and really a different story is what really got me over the edge.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's one of the essays in A Different Story that isn't from the book, but relates to the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, why am I hiding behind this cloak of a novel? I want to own it, that this happens and this stuff happens. And I think that people relate more to real stories than novels, because novels can be fantasy and you can be whisked away and entertained. But I think when you read a memoir and you really know that happened to someone, I think there's a better ability to connect with a character in a memoir versus a character in a novel. Just like I think it would be easier for me to connect with someone from a documentary versus a fictionalized movie.
Yeah.
But I thank A Different Story for that. That really kind of got me over the edge to say, no, it's going to be a memoir.
Mm-hmm. So what does that throw up now then for the memoir?
So right now I'm working with an editor on a book proposal. So the first draft has been written, and now I'm working with an editor on a book proposal to see if it has legs in the world.
Mm-hmm.
It is my intention to publish it, because again, I feel like publishing this memoir, listen, if it were wildly successful, that would be amazing. But for me, it's the final step, I think, in my personal growth, to not be afraid to put it out there into the world. So it needs to come out, because I need to be able to say, you know what, I did it. I told my story. I told the truth of what happened. I memorialized my experience for everyone to see.
Yeah.
So hopefully with this editor's help, I can get it closer to being born, my 5th child.
Fabulous. What was interesting to me is it relates to a little bit what we were talking about before we went live about, you have certain fears and you've had certain fears, which it seems like somehow you've gone over a hurdle. I think that's what you said, you've gone over a hurdle about those fears. It doesn't mean that those fears are not existent, I think, if I'm reading it correctly. But I'm really interested now on what happens with those fears when you move forward with it now.
Well, for me, I think it's not giving a crap about what other people think. I think for me, it's at the end of the day, I know who I am. And people who know me know who I am. Yeah. And I feel this world has gotten so kooky and crazy with social media and the facades people put on. And, you know, I know friends who post these picture perfect family photos while they tell me they want to get a divorce. And I feel like in some ways, this social media, which was created to connect people, just puts more of a facade on us all.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, I think, you know, at the age of 45, I finally know who I am and what I'm about and what's important to me and what's not. And selfishly, this book is not about having a successful book. This book is about having the confidence to step out in the world and just be who I am.
Mm.
And not giving a crap about any judgments people pass on me. At the end of the day, I just want a well-written book.
Mm-hmm.
I want a well-written product. If people change their feelings about me because of it, well, then guess what, Rhea? They never knew who I was to begin with.
Mm.
And they had some sort of weird vision of who I was. I've always been the person in that book.
Mm-hmm.
And if they didn't know that person, well,
They do now, or they will do when they read it.
they will do. And if they don't like that person, I used to be a chameleon who would change and alter for the sake of others, always fitting in, never wanting to make waves. And what I'm realizing now is, and for me, it really hit, it's when I turned 40, but it's really when I left work. Because when I left work, I was, you know, getting up every morning at 4 a.m. I wasn't getting home until 8 or 10 or 1 in the morning. I never had time to really think.
Mm-hmm.
So many of us, and that's why I feel so fortunate that I had this ability to take this sabbatical, that I could really think. And what I realized was I almost didn't know who I was.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was always just doing and playing different roles. And I was playing the employee role and the wife role and the mom role. And I never really sat down and really thought about who I was. And really, this memoir is the truth to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so my days of conforming to fit in people's boxes are done. So even if I end up on my own little island, so be it. I'll have the peace of mind up here. And what I've realized is having the world be an okay place to live in between my ears is better than being part of any community.
Yeah.
And I only want to be part of communities when I am who I am.
Yeah.
If that makes
It
sense.
makes perfect sense. Really perfect sense. So I'm really intrigued now. Whether you think it's the memoir that's helped you with this realization, or whether it's writing.
I think it's writing. I think writing is the gasoline for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it all started with the writing, because, you know, in method writing, at the end of the day, you're invited with the question, what's the story of my life? What's the truth of who I am? You can't hide from that question.
Mm-hmm.
And so it started with that, with really putting myself on the page. And the stuff I would write was shocking. And then I would read it, and that was shocking. But then what I found out was it was the vast majority of the time I got, oh my gosh, me too. Thank you for putting that out there. I love how you're giving voice to this or voice to that. So that was an encouragement. So then when I really started working on my memoir with that method writing, I really tasked myself to really put my honest, deep feelings on the page,
Mm-hmm.
really writing from that deep voice and that deep place in what are very difficult things to talk about, marriage, parenting, money, power, all that. And let's face it, most marriages, what are the biggest things? It's sex, money, right? So it's like my book talks about all that stuff. And so method writing got me there, but I'll tell you, it was a different story that pushed me over the edge, because it's a nice concept. Oh, I'm working on a memoir. I'm working on a memoir or whatever. I'm working on a novel. And, the funny thing is, and this, Rhea, if you're writing a memoir, you can do a book proposal before you even write it.
Yeah.
But I couldn't. I almost had to write it under the guise of a novel to give me the courage to get it all on paper.
Yeah.
After you write 100,000 words, you're not going to abandon that ship. I've spent hundreds of hours on this book now, so I'm not going to abandon the ship. But it wasn't until when I published a different story, it wasn't until my mom and dad wrote the personal essays and my brother read the personal essays and friends read the personal essays. Now I'm like, I'm out there. So it was because of that, I literally decided to make it a memoir probably within weeks after a different story was published. And that was really why. A different story did it for me. It kind of, your book and your press kind of took me from the side, like I was like in the wings of the stage, and you took that hook. You were like, boom, you're under the spotlight, Jamie. And then you know what, Rhea, I realized? I was okay. The world didn't fall apart. I didn't lose the people who loved me. In fact, I realized instead of losing the people who loved me, I saw the people who loved me. Because I saw the people who said, I want to read this book. Oh, so you know what I'm saying? And I think that was the catalyst for me to say, yeah, I'm putting this out there. Who am I afraid of?
Well, I love all that. Your energy changed so much when you talked about that.
Well, because honestly, now that you're asking me, I'm starting to realize it. I don't think I really realized it until now, but it kind of it's kind of like this call took all these loose puzzle pieces and put them together.
Yeah. That's really interesting, because that's what I've been finding with some of the interviews that I've been doing. And certainly we were just talking about, I was interviewed last week by Jules, and in a lot of that conversation, that's me having realizations about my career path and how I've got to be here. It's just nice just to take the time to reflect and see, even if it's in the guise of an interview. I think that's one of the added benefits of these conversations.
Well, it's true, right? Because we're all so busy doing. I know for me, I don't spend a lot of time reflecting. But when I'm posed questions to reflect upon, it's like the connections are there to be made.
Yeah.
It's almost like we should interview each other every month just to see what comes out. Not even interview, just ask each other questions, because none of us give ourselves the opportunity to really think. We're always just doing and pushing and doing and not thinking about the why.
Yeah.
So I appreciate this because, one of the things I really struggled with when I left Goldman is it was a very linear organization, and I lived a very linear life. You graduate from university, you get a good paying job, you meet a spouse, you have kids, you try to get promoted at your job. And I was always looking for the next thing. So it was the next promotion, the next bonus, the next baby, the next milestone. And when I stopped working, I almost had agoraphobia, because I didn't see my path anymore. I was just kind of in this field. And it was so hard for me. Within the first couple of weeks, I was looking to buy a franchise of a pizzeria. I thought about going to grad school. I thought about going to law school because I needed another thing on my checklist to check, because I'm always checking, always on this path. And I literally had this agoraphobia because it was like everything was available to me, but nothing. And one of the things that I've really learned from you and Jules and method writing is really just letting the universe unfold for you.
Mm.
And it's really hard to do when you're an achievement-oriented, impatient person like me. And I've given up on this book loads of times. This is so stupid. This is a waste of my time. No one cares, blah, blah, blah. And then sometimes I would just take a month off and sit and reflect. And then I would get spurred on again. And then look how the universe unfolded here with a different story. And then I met this amazing editor. So I've learned a lot about just sitting back and breathing and almost letting things happen instead of always pushing things to happen.
Mm. No, I love that. I mean, I've really been seeing that over the last few years. And I think once you start seeing that life kind of is really dynamic, and for me, it was like, I could see that it was, for me, it was like trying to push a rock uphill. And then I don't need to do that anymore. And life has unfolded in the most amazing of ways. And I see that happening with you. I can see that happening. How
Yeah.
the book was a novel, how it became, we got involved in a different story. I've seen a shift in you. I've seen that before my very eyes. You've really stepped up. And that for me, it's like in a dynamic life where we're waiting for it to unfold, somehow we have more energy for it all. And we end up doing more, not less.
It's interesting because I feel like I've spent my life in a place of scarcity,
Mm-hmm.
like never feeling there was enough time, always feeling like I was coming up short.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because I was so tired and never feeling like a good enough mother, never feeling like a good enough spouse, never feeling like a good enough employee. And I feel like just the last year, really trying to flip into from scarcity to abundance,
Mm-hmm.
and realizing that there's always enough time. If I sit out on this opportunity, another opportunity will unfold. And that's just been a real shift for me. And I feel like as a person, I'm just much more peaceful than I used to be, because you're not always chasing and scrounging.
Yeah.
You kind of sit back and say, you know what? More and more things are going to come.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's been really evident that that's how your book has happened. You've pulled back, you've come back to it, you've pulled back, you've come back to it, and all this story going on about it. And I think that's going to be really inspiring for a lot of people. Because if people could be more trusting of that happening, it won't worry them. Like they won't get worried when they're not writing for a period of time.
Right. Right. I think that's true.
We've been going for nearly 40 minutes, so it was run slightly over, but I kind of knew that we would, because it's been fascinating. But is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to touch on just before we stop?
I guess I would say that as a woman I guess I would say to women out there who are in the weeds with their families to not give up on themselves. And it's like the oxygen mask on an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
Put it on yourself before you put it on your kids.
Yeah.
So to make sure, and this goes for anybody who's, you know, a caregiver or whatever, just make sure you're breathing life. Make sure you're shining your diamond. Make sure you're spending your time shining your diamonds. And if the time, listen, there's certain things in our life we have to do. I have to do laundry. I have to cook dinner. I have to do that. But I don't have to possibly do the PTO, which didn't shine my diamond. I can take a writing class instead. And I think that's really important to realize that your children want to see you have an enriching life away from them.
Mm.
And so to invite people to consider pursuing that. And that might be writing, that might be painting, that might be CrossFit, that might be, you know, going back to school and becoming a doctor.
Mm.
But that it's not too late. Like if 45 is too late to become, like if 45 is too late, I don't trust 20-year-olds and 20-year-olds to make good decisions for the rest of their life. Do you know what I mean? Our prefrontal cortex, it was not fully developed. You know, you got to be able to shift and move and do different things in your 40s, in your 50s, in your 60s, in your 70s. I refuse to accept that your path in life is decided by your 30, because I know so much more now than I knew then.
Mm. Fabulous. I just want to check in with Anne to see if she wanted to ask you any questions, or just give her a moment to come in with a question if she wants to.
Yeah, I'd love to ask a question, actually.
Want to put your video on then, Anne?
Nah,
Okay.
you don't mind. Just come from the pool. Forgive me, wet hair. So I just adored what you said, Jamie. And I'm so happy and fascinated by the fact that you're now calling your work a memoir rather than a novel. And I know you talked about it, but I'm not sure if I got a complete take on how did you feel when you realized that you were not going to have to write a novel and that you could call it and make it the truth?
Mm.
It's funny, I would have thought I would have been more scared, but I'm not, because I feel like all that work about getting over it and getting comfortable happened in little bits and pieces. So I think I hid behind this moniker of novel because I was so afraid of being truthful and honest about my experiences, what happened, the decisions I made, the mistakes I made. And then with every method writing piece I wrote and shared in class, with every time I had some powerful, controversial comment in my writing about motherhood and marriage. And then finally, when I published that book, and I think it's the essay, A Different Story, actually. I think it's actually that essay. And then I realized, oh, Jamie, all the things you were afraid of already happened. You've already shared your deepest thoughts. You've already shared your deepest secrets. And one of them's published in a book that people can buy on Amazon, and your world hasn't collapsed. Nothing scary has happened. All the scary things that I would imagine would have happened, none of them happened. So it's almost like being afraid of a boogeyman, but then realizing the boogeyman's not there. So it's like, what am I afraid of? I've already gone through all the motions and nothing scary has happened. So why not be truthful? And then I also felt like the story has to be told with the way it was told. Like the story has to be told with the way it was told, because if the whole goal of this book, for me is to rip off my 45-year-old muzzle, then it has to be a memoir. It has to be. That's the whole point of it. It has to be. It has to be unashamed. This happened. This is the truth. This is the story of my life. This is the truth of who I am. It can't be any other way. It would defeat the whole purpose of why I wrote it. And why I wrote it was to prove to myself that being me, who I really am, and saying my truth, putting it all out there, I'm still worthy of existence and love. I'm still worthy. I don't have to be someone's puppet in order to have love. I don't need to read the party line in order to have a job. I don't need to tell lies to others and myself in order to be a good mom. No, like I am still worthy of love, and I am still worthy of the ability to take up space in this room, on this earth. So it has to be.
Must have been a relief.
Yeah. I feel like, I mean, it's taken a long time to do it, but God willing, I have a lot of years to live in this way. But yeah, it feels really good to feel the ability to be honest and true and not to be afraid. I think at the end of the day, we're afraid of losing love or acceptance or followers, or whatever it is. We're afraid of losing some connection with people. But I realize at the end of the day, if I'm not comfortable with what's in between these ears, it doesn't matter. I could have a gazillion friends, but if I'm not who I am with them, did I really have them as friends? No, because they didn't really know who I was. So yeah.
That's fabulous. We're going to have to stop.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
Thanks for a fabulous question, Anne. Thank you.
And thank you, Ria. This has been so helpful to me.
Me too.
So can people get in touch with you somehow? Can they connect with you somehow if they want to?
Yeah, I'm so bad with my website. I got to get that open. So I don't know what I should give you. I mean, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. Jamie Fiore Higgins.
Yeah, it's I'm sure if they just Google the name, they'll find you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a unique name.
Yeah. So that's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Jamie. I've really appreciated the conversation. It's been lovely just to have this one-on-one time with you. Really.
And thank you, because I think your questions really gave me an opportunity to reflect and articulate my feelings, which sometimes I'm just too busy to even think about. So thank you.
Oh, nice. Lovely. Thank you.